I chose for this assignment an audio game called SoundRTS, which, like it sounds, is a real-time strategy game based around core concepts of typical RTS games like Civilization, Age of Empires, or the Total War games. It was developed in 2007 by SoundMud, and according to the game's own description, remains, quote, one of the most successful attempts at representing the war strategy genre in audio. I played the game on a Toshiba laptop running Windows 10 and used the laptop's keyboard, a trackpad, and Bose over-ear headphones. The basic mechanics of Sound RTS are similar to old RTS games where the player is given control of a parcel or parcels of land and a few units and some buildings to produce these basic first-tier units. In Sound RTS, there are peasants which gather resources and build buildings, and combat units like foot soldiers, archers, knights, etc. There are randomly placed gold mines and forests from which peasants can gather gold and wood, which act as currency for more units and buildings. The basic objective in all play modes is to defeat the enemy kingdom, as it's called, by destroying all enemy units and buildings. I started with the campaign mode, in which the player goes through a sequence of chapters that are each a distinct match of sorts, and against which the player fights increasingly formidable enemy kingdoms. In the first couple chapters, the maps are 3 tiles by 3 tiles, with the player starting out in the control of the bottom 3 tiles and the enemy in control of 2 of the top 3 tiles. I'm calling them tiles for lack of a better word, and because it makes sense to conceptualize the maps into a series of interconnected squares, or any shape really, that you can move between. While the controls are not explained at the outset, you mostly control the game by using arrow keys to navigate between tiles, pressing Tab and Control to switch between each input within those tiles, and pressing Enter to activate or use whichever input you've selected. You can also use the mouse, as left-click selects units if the input is placed on the unit, and right-click tells the selected unit to move to the selected location or exploit a selected resource. The usual conventions of an RTS game are all present. Moving your unit into an enemy tile or directly to an enemy unit activates combat, which is determined, like most strategy games, by certain units' attack damage and health. Playing the game immediately forced me to recognize how central visuals are to video games and especially real-time strategy games. I think this would apply to any sighted person playing an audio game, but it's still a disorienting experience nonetheless. Because the controls are not laid out and I couldn't find a reliable control tutorial online, it took me probably 15 or 20 minutes to get myself oriented in the game interface, figure out some of the controls, though it appears that there are commands in the game that I still don't yet understand, and understand the basic objectives, since those are provided only in a description of the game I can find on audiogames.net. Once I was accustomed to the audio interface, which provides verbal feedback from an automated voice reading coded text, which sounds like a male Siri, I realized that the game had a lot more moving parts than I anticipated. I had to get my peasants gathering resources, my footmen exploring the other tiles and fighting off occasional invasions of enemy footmen, and get to building barracks and stables to make an army. This is harder than I imagined because even as the game gives you constant audio feedback to orient you and to execute certain actions, it's still hard to find particular buildings within tiles or even find the right tile. Especially in a crisis situation like when an enemy footman suddenly invades your town hall, it's very difficult to actually maneuver yourself to the tile where your town hall lies and select your town hall, and even harder to find your lone footman and get him to that tile to defend your kingdom. At the same time, it posed a really interesting challenge where the limits of my sensory perception are constantly stretched, and I find myself more actively engaged in the game space. Because you have to actually become intuitively familiar with the environment, you end up impressing a sort of quasi-visual map into your brain that you then pair with the audio inputs to move around the map more quickly. The parts of the game that struck me the most, however, weren't really critical to gameplay. Outside the basic audio inputs that tell you where you are and what you're doing, the game also gives you more subtle sounds that either provide ambiance, enhance the gameplay itself, or illustrate small mechanics that you would otherwise get from only a visual interface. For example, when one of your units moves left to right across a tile to reach a distant tile on the far right of the map, the sound of that unit's footsteps are stereo phased to the left and right channels of your headphones, and slowly fade from the left channel, balance between left and right, and then get louder in the right channel. It's like hearing someone walk across the room you're in, left to right, or even from behind you to in front of you. It's a sort of surprising and slightly eerie sensation, but one that really draws you into the game. Another example, when you tell your peasant to gather wood from a nearby forest, you can hear the distant sounds of an axe chopping at the wood. It not only reinforces your command, but also provides a sort of realism that's hard to replicate without a visual interface. There are even more ambient sounds, like the sounds of certain terrain and certain tiles like bubbling rivers, rustling leaves, or rocky roads. Once you enter battle, the standard sounds of swords clashing and men yelling in pain ensue. But in contrast to a typical RTS game, this is not only more immersive, but essential to dealing with the combat itself, since you have to send your army to the location of the fighting based on where it sounds like it's coming from, using, again, stereo phasing. Ultimately, SoundRTS was a deeply immersive and extremely challenging audio game that I would recommend to someone with a control scheme tutorial and a lot of patience.